Hi there, I'm Kylie Mowbray Allen from Hello Media.
And I'm Jenny Walk from Elephant in the Room Consulting, and you're tuning into Bite Size Business Live Podcast, the show that helps business owners get clarity and insight to grow their dream business.
Whether you're launching, ready to scale, or figuring out what's next, we discuss the nitty-gritty, the hard bits, the opportunities, and the behind the scenes, and share how we've grown our own companies and helped others do the same.
We're glad you're here. Monday morning in Chile.
I'm chilly too, Jenny, but I think it's because I'm still not 100% COVID recovered, so I'm just a little but as you know, I do love a little chill. It's very, very fresh. And I'm excited to see you, especially after our very, very big day in Brisbane on Friday with our Growth Trio workshop.
So much fun. It was so great to have some amazing business owners and some new business owners in the room having a chat about what they're doing, what they're trying, and how they're trying to grow their business, and also some old faces, which was wonderful to see. So great to hang out with you and Ash in person, definitely.
So good. And today we're talking about the second part in our Business for Good series. So this series, for those of you that might have missed last week, this is all about business for good, and we're really focusing on sustainability, but in different aspects of it. And today we're talking about inclusivity, so Indigenous cultural awareness in business. So this is absolutely Jenny's expertise or area of expertise. So I'm super looking forward to learning from you today, Jenny. So firstly, could you explain even what that is?
It's, yeah, most definitely, particularly off the back of NAIDOC Week. We've just finished NAIDOC Week here and across Australia, and we had Reconciliation Week as well earlier in the year, into the end of May and June. Really, the idea about Indigenous cultural awareness or inclusivity is really around providing a space or inviting organisations to really understand the cultural landscape that exists in Australia from a First Nations perspective. We talk a lot about multiculturalism and diversity and inclusion within organisations, and that DEI space, or diversity, equity and inclusion, is becoming really important in large organisations. However, a lot of that, particularly in the Australian context, needs to start with understanding a little bit more about First Nations history, and that's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history here in Australia, and recognising how that's informed some of the landscape, the way individuals show up, but also how you create cultural safety in an organisation, and the value that brings to both production, culture, internal organisational culture, and employee well-being.
I think that's fantastic. And I love that we're really shining a light on this today. And I was doing a little Googling before and found the Queensland website and Queensland Business website, and it gave me a glossary of First Nations terms. Now, one that I'd like to talk about is that it says Aboriginal is a person who is a member of the Aboriginal race of Australia, identifies as an Aboriginal person, or is accepted by the Aboriginal community in which they live. What does that mean exactly, that third line, accepted by the community in which they live? So does that mean you don't need to be, but you can identify as?
It's a really good question, and there's no one probably answer. I'm only speaking on behalf of one Aboriginal person. So really, when we're talking about being Aboriginal, particularly because of the conversation we have at the moment and with stolen generations, being able to identify and have birth certificates to say that I'm an Aboriginal person, or have and say that I am of Aboriginal blood, other than doing a DNA test, can be tricky for some people. And so the common definition we use is, one is a member of an Aboriginal race, so has historical lineage into an Aboriginal community, such as my mother, who is a Bundjalung woman. So therefore, by blood, I'm a Bundjalung woman. So therefore, I can be a Bundjalung woman, for example, but I may not identify. So there are Aboriginal people who choose not to identify as an Aboriginal person. So you may know them as, having an Aboriginal parents, but they may not say that they're Aboriginal. Okay, so it's a choice to be able to identify as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander as a human, as a person. So firstly, being of a race, being identifying, so saying that I am Aboriginal, but the third one really sits to people who maybe have born within the community know that there are connections to the community, but may not necessarily know that who those connections are. And so this really relates to that sort of stolen generation piece, where we know we have lineage into Aboriginal history, but we may not know what that connection is. So therefore you are within that community identified and accepted as an Aboriginal person, even though you may not be able to say I'm Bundjalung or I'm Wiradjuri. I may not know my lineage, but I know that I'm an Aboriginal person. So the last piece is really around being accepted by that community as an Aboriginal person. It generally means that you have some lineage to the community. Having said that, there are cases of non-Indigenous people, so non-Aboriginal heritage people, being accepted and given a skin name and being part of the Aboriginal community, but not have Aboriginal blood. That is very rare, but it does happen in some cases. But in most cases, it's really around having a conversation about someone who knows that they're Aboriginal, but does not have direct connection or knowledge of that lineage, but they're still accepted as somebody who is Aboriginal.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that explanation, because that's an interesting piece. I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk about how we can change things in the workplace and the kind of work that you're doing out there with your consultancy. And I love that you gave me a link a little earlier, which I know we'll be sharing in the comments, which is creating culturally safe workplaces for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So are you able to share a little bit about the building awareness and cultural safety in your workplace? I think that's a really interesting piece.
So cultural safety is something that's become very synonymous with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but all First Nations peoples, but actually needs to exist for everybody. And so the work that I do within Elephant in the Room and the consulting that we do is really around creating awareness and understanding of First Nations peoples, but we use it as a lens or a lever to make people and organizations aware of potentially structural and bias that exists within the organization. So unconscious bias and racism is something that exists. It's a human condition. It's something that everybody has. We just don't often like to talk about it because it's a little bit uncomfortable for people to talk about. So when we talk around First Nations peoples and bringing cultural awareness into organizations about First Nations people, fundamentally the work I do is around unpacking and raising awareness of unconscious bias and racism. And so when we understand our belief structures, we understand how they're created and how they're formed, it actually allows us to see the way that we engage with other people, how we build a safe culture and a respectful culture within our workplace. Often we talk around creating, diversity, inclusive workplace and say we all have to accept everybody as equal, but we don't understand why we may not. We don't actually understand and consider the reasons that we have these biases against other people. And it's our belief structures and our values system that actually create that unconscious bias or that overt bias in workplaces. So when we talk around creating cultural safe workplaces, particularly for First Nations people, it's giving people an opportunity to understand the historical landscape for First Nations peoples in Australia, how that has impacted the way we work, our ways of being, the way we show up in the world, but also some of the nervousness around working that we find when working with organizations and the biases that exist. For example, I mentioned earlier, not everybody wants to identify as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person because they know by doing so, they will actually be confronted with more bias and negativity than if they just show up as an Australian. And that still exists today. So cultural learning and cultural awareness and building cultural safety in a workplace is really around having organizations understand their employees and their landscape and identify whether they are truly an inclusive space for all peoples within their workplace. And where it might not be, find strategies and practical ways to overcome some of those structural or personal biases that people have in the workplace.
I love that you've said that it's up to you to choose whether you want to identify and make that public, et cetera, et cetera. But it's blimmin' tragic that it's still going on in 2024, that if you choose not to, for the reason of there's going to be bias and there's going to be potentially be a whole world of problems. That's just, yeah, that's all the things, Jenny, all the things.
It is, and it happens also in the business space. I met a colleague this morning and we were talking about that as an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander business. So I'm an Aboriginal owned business. I choose to identify. When I first started, I didn't really to me, I'm Aboriginal. I can't not be Aboriginal. I choose to do that. And so I didn't make a fuss about it in my business. And as soon as I started identifying and I put the Supply Nation logo on my website, the conversations that I had with clients actually changed. So from a coaching perspective, no one really cares that I'm First Nations. From a coaching perspective, I just deliver the work that I do and I'm a coach. That's what I do. But in the corporate space, it's become both a positive and a negative lever to have yourself identify as a First Nations businesses. Some organizations automatically assume higher risk when you're a First Nations business or person. They make assumptions around how you might show up and your governance and your commitment or how you might work and your quality of work because we're First Nations. So there are still those biases do exist within the organizations and a procurement and a supply chain perspective. And the same also is true when we're doing employment. If we're employing First Nations people, organizations often immediately assume that we need to have a different stream or a different entry point because the capability may not be the same. But when we're making those assumptions, we don't really think about, the organization doesn't take the time to say, well, why do I believe that we need to have a different area or a different stream for First Nations peoples? And it's understanding that why do I have that assumption? Why do I have that belief? That actually is the beginning of cultural awareness in the workplace. If I truly believe that, for example, if we understand that in remote communities, the opportunities for First Nations peoples are often less because of some of those institutional biases that exist, or access to schooling, access to education, access to employment opportunities. Now, they exist for all humans who live in remote communities, but sometimes there is another layer that goes across when we're working with First Nations peoples. So if the organization knows and understands that, when we're putting in a position, or we're putting in an opportunity for First Nations peoples within the organization, or employment streams, or trying to proactively recruit Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, we need to understand why we're doing that. We're doing that because historically we've been excluded from employment, we're excluded from education opportunities, we're excluded from training opportunities because of our race. And so we're now trying to rectify that. So things like Reconciliation Australia and through Reconciliation Action Plans, celebrating NAIDOC, and also having things like cultural awareness is making people aware of the historical and the systemic challenges that existed in the country that in many cases only ceased in the 80s and 90s. Some of those policies still existed well into this kind of the last 20 to 30 years. And so we're not talking about things that happened happened generations ago. We're having to overcome challenges that exist in my generation and exist in your generation, the next generation below me. And so that's what these training programs and these things are around. So the toolkit that was developed with in partnership with Queensland Government is around bringing awareness in a really simple and accessible way for small businesses to say, what are some of the things you need to consider to make sure you're creating a safe space for your employees? And we're doing it through a First Nations lens. But you can take that cultural capability toolkit and consider it for any diverse group within your organization. How does somebody who may be LGBTQI+A, how do they want to show up and do they feel safe? What's the language that you and your organization to make them feel safe and secure and protected in the organization? How do you do that for migrants or people from diverse backgrounds who may not have English as their first language? So there are a lot of those practices that we need to consider. And by doing it, you're creating cultural safety. Now, why is cultural safety important? Cultural safety means higher trust, higher engagement, more discretionary effort, lower risk of injury, lower risk of bullying and harassment, and lower risk of absenteeism. So building cultural safety has a revenue implication for businesses as well as a well-being implication. So it's not just about touchy-feely anymore. It's actually about creating highly productive, engaged workplaces, which are going to give you better outcome, better revenue, and better production for your business. So it's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's actually good business to do it.
God, it's definitely both. It is the right thing to do 100%, but you're so right. It is good business. So Jenny, for those of us with small businesses, I know we talked last week a little bit about sustainability in terms of our supply chains and things, and we can make better choices about where we're buying from, etc. But what about those of us that want to go a step further and just show support. And we've talked about it on Friday a little bit about being an ally. What can you share about that? Without doing it in a really, so that the rest of us aren't doing it in a really facetious way.
I think you have to understand why you want to be an ally. So it goes back to, like we talk about, we do this when we talk about our businesses, is the why are we doing anything? What is the intention behind what you're doing? If you're wanting to be an ally because you truly see and recognize and acknowledge that there's been disadvantage within First Nations communities in Australia, then being an ally is providing opportunities and ensuring that your workplace and your staff are open to engaging with First Nations businesses and employees, and you're doing that in a really genuine way to make them feel safe, secure, and want to thrive in your workplace. So that's an intention around recognizing potential disadvantage. And I use the term potential, not everybody is disadvantaged, not every First Nations person is vulnerable. However, we are more vulnerable in some respects. So if you understand why you want to be an ally and what your intention behind that is, then it's finding things that align with that why. I want to have more First Nations people in my organization because I can see I can provide opportunities that other organizations may not. Or I work, and a lot of my community work is based in a regional area with a high Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population. So therefore, I want to actually have my business reflect the environment that I'm in. So that's why you would maybe start engaging more effectively in an allyship or an intentional way. If you're a large corporate, it's good business for government engagement. The more First Nations businesses and employees that you have, the more favorably you may be looked on when doing, procurement opportunities with government. So it's understanding the why and then choosing your ally path based on that, so that there is alignment and there's authenticity in why you're doing it. And just calling it out, right? If you're doing it because you know you're going to get engaging in First Nations employees and businesses because it will improve my chance of winning a procurement opportunity, don't hide that. Don't pretend that's not the case. Be real about that, because that authenticity will actually give you a more aligned projects, but actually companies will respect that. People will respect that, but it also provides opportunities for us as First Nations businesses as well. Does that make sense?
It really does. Thank you. So do you think that one way of showing you're an ally would be literally putting in your footer, acknowledging the traditional owners of where you are?
Exactly. And acknowledgement of country is a really simple way to start your allyship and awareness piece. Knowing what country you're already on. So knowing I currently live and work on Turrbal Yagara country. I'm a Bundjalung woman. So knowing that and having those conversations with individuals, understanding where they're from. So if you have First Nations employees, recognizing that, that their cultural practices might be different, and learning about that is a really beautiful way to start showing your support and awareness and becoming an ally. Supporting Indigenous businesses, but also providing equal opportunity in that true sense of the word, and trying to unpack some of the biases that may exist in your organization. All those elements will help you create cultural safety, not just for First Nations people, but it also attracts other people to your organization. Being a strong ally of First Nations peoples is saying to your clients and your customers and your employees that you want to create a safe space. You want to create a company. You want to work in a way that is open and inclusive to everybody, and that you're actively doing things about it. You're not just sitting passive. Allyship is about being active. It's not about just saying, I bought the artwork, so therefore I'm an ally. It's actually doing things in your business to create inclusivity for First Nations people.
What about shout outs? So you buy the artwork and then you do regular shout outs and you tag the businesses and things, and just helping raise awareness of those businesses.
Of course, all of those things will certainly help. I mean, allyship is really around is providing support in whatever say. So if it's social media, if it's through your supply chain, if it's through your employment practices, or it might simply be, supporting a local organization or a local charity if donations are part of your business strategy, or it might be just participating in the community. Turn up to community days, go to a reconciliation week event, or go to a NAIDOC week event, or invite some of the community into your organization to say, hey, share a little bit of your local culture and knowledge with us. So there are lots of different ways that you can create that space and create connection. And it's just a matter of finding what's going to work for your organization.
Love it. Thank you. So Jenny, what about cultural appropriation and stereotypes? What
Stereotypes is a whole other conversation. That's a 2-hour workshop that we deliver on stereotype and unconscious bias. Really, cultural appropriation is really around is that I'm using Aboriginal artwork in my designs where I have no connection or interest in actually the culture. I'm just using it because it looks pretty and I know people will connect with it. So really, I think it's about if you want to use anything to do with First Nations cultures, it's understanding where it is and where historically it comes from, why you're using it, and being really connected again with that intention, but not just slapping an artwork on the front door of your business because it looks good and it will make people feel, wow, it's amazing. It's actually about using it in the right way. So I have artwork that's been painted for me or provided for me that I connect with, not only as a First Nations woman, but I just love Indigenous artwork. But it's not about, I think the cultural appropriation piece is when you as a non-Indigenous business start using Indigenous terms and Indigenous ways of being in an ingenuine or misaligned way, if you like.
Love that, Jenny. Love this conversation. And as always, whenever we're on this topic, I just feel the way you share your knowledge is just so inclusive and always so respectful. I'm blown away always. And you always start it with, I'm only speaking on behalf of myself. This is just my views, which I think is wonderful.
Which is really important. I think that's one of the key pieces if you're looking to sort of jump into this space, is to recognize that when you're talking to an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, we are only sharing our view. We don't represent every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person in Australia or the world. It's just our view and our perspective. Mine is based on my own personal experience, my experience in delivering cultural training programs. We've delivered probably over 150 in-person training programs over the last couple of years, running supply diversity training for Supply Nation, working with companies to deliver, inclusive procurement strategies. So this is based on my experience in this space, and that's what I'm wanting to share. It's only one, and you don't have to agree with everything I say, but it's one perspective, and I invite you to take lots of perspectives if you're looking to play in this space.
Thank you. And so obviously we're going to share this great document of all the information in our notes. So we'll pop that up in a moment. But how can people get in touch with you? And if they really want to make some big changes, or they want to have some presentations in their company? And
if anyone was interested in learning a little bit more about the cultural awareness work that we do, we're actually just rebuilding our webpage that has that information on it. It'll be live by this afternoon. So it's elephantintheroomau.com. Go to that's our consulting website. Have a look at the page on our cultural awareness and cultural learning pages. We talk about cultural learning rather than just awareness because we want an exchange of knowledge. It's not just one way. It's about learning and building your understanding. So yeah, hit us up on our socials, Elephant in the Room AU, or head to our website, and we'd be happy to jump on a call and chat about, how you might like to, build your cultural awareness or cultural safety within your organization.
I love that. Thank you. So next week, we're going to be talking part 3 of our Business for Good, and all about focusing on sustainability. But we're going to be talking about accessibility. That was a tricky one for my accent. Accessibility.
And I cannot wait for this conversation, because the way that we've talked about this in past, when we have our discussions around accessibility, understanding how your business shows up from your website to your socials, and even the way you do business, and how that impacts the way people can work with you, is so critical. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion next week on accessibility in business.
Me too. Well, thanks so much. Another great chat. I always learn so much, and my brain is full and ready to go away and deep dive into a bit more learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And I cannot wait till next week, but make sure we, for the accessibility, I know, Kylie, you've already got some great advice on your website, hellomedia.team, about accessibility in business. So if you want to do some pre-work before our session next week, definitely head to Kylie's website, hellomedia.team, and check out her information on accessibility in business now.
Thanks.
Well, I look forward. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Bite Side Business Live podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure spending our time with you. Be sure to subscribe and follow us so you don't miss any future episodes, including our one next week on accessibility in business. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kylie, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Cool.